In the last 10 years, I'm pretty sure I've spent more hours watching Skyrim videos than actually playing Skyrim. If you click this video, there's a good chance that you have too. Even if you still play Skyrim every day of your life, it's undeniable that there's something interesting going on with the way we all relate to this game. Specifically, we need to go back to Skyrim's core appeal, the central fantasy that it offered all of those years ago, which is now the epicenter of our collective nostalgia. And Skyrim has no fantasy more powerful than its unofficial slogan, "Go anywhere, do anything." It's easy to look back at this slogan and think, wow, what a joke. Skyrim in many ways disappointed players of role-playing games who were looking to really go anywhere and really do anything. But at the same time, no one can deny that when this game came out, it seemed, and that's the key word here, seemed absolutely revolutionary in the scope of freedom that it offered. It's basically a cliche at this point to say that Skyrim didn't do anything specifically best. It's not excellent as an RPG, it's not excellent as an action combat experience. You've heard it all before. The game's most rewarding moments don't really happen in the context of interacting with a specific mechanic. Game developer and YouTuber Jonas Tiroler breaks down gameplay experiences into two elements. The first is appeal. Appeal is what makes a game gain players. It sells players a fantasy, usually by activating an urge, like making you want to do a thing or be a thing. His second idea is fun. Fun is game systems, game mechanics, the actual playing of the game in a way that is rewarding and challenging. Jonas actually has a really interesting idea about what fun is, which I recommend looking into on his channel. But for our purposes, let's just say it's a rewarding experience of gameplay, whatever that means to you. Now, it would be stupid to say that Skyrim is a failure of fun when clearly it's one of the most beloved games ever made, and many millions of players had fun with it. At the same time, the more that the years go by, the more I think that what Skyrim was offering was a kind of extended appeal, a gameplay experience that prolonged the feeling of not really knowing what the game was, allowing players to live in their own fantasy for longer than most other games could ever reach. And that's a big claim, so let's break this down. At a fundamental level, the gameplay experience that Skyrim offers relies on you always looking to another horizon and searching for that go anywhere, do anything. The question, which is really up to you, is whether you ever reached any place or anything worth doing in itself. The answer for most players is probably yes, and yet, the longer I spend thinking about this game, the more I realize that it was the appeal, the promise of its fantasy that kept me engaged, not the fun of that experience in itself. Back in 2011, I was a player of console games. I had a PlayStation 2 and a PlayStation 3. Games back then were so different from today. Most of them restricted you with invisible walls and a level-by-level design where you had to select from menus, almost like you were choosing what chapter to play on your DVD. And yeah, Skyrim still has its own limitations, but when you compare to what was mainstream at that time, it's a huge difference. Skyrim felt like having a whole universe inside your little console. Compared to Modern Warfare, or FIFA, or Gran Turismo 5, or Assassin's Creed, or Lord of the Rings Conquest.
It's pretty sweet, and I, for one, have always wanted to murder hobbits since the first movie.
Yeah, this really did feel like you could go anywhere or do anything. So is it really so surprising that this is what lingered with people? That this game continues to maintain, seemingly long past its prime, an absolutely dominant position as a topic of online conversations? If you know my channel, you know I'm always trying to figure things out, trying to dissect, analyze, criticize, trying to look at everything in minute detail to try to get some kind of hidden knowledge. But here, maybe it's a lot simpler than I initially thought. There's another popular idea nowadays that Skyrim didn't do anything first, but rather combined an existing framework of ideas from different games, including different Elder Scrolls games, in a unique way that just hit the perfect spot for that wide mainstream audience at that exact time. This is easy to agree with, almost to a fault. But it's not just that Skyrim brought some mild RPG elements, mixed with action gameplay for smooth-brained kids like me. I don't think anything about the game as a mechanical system is actually what sticks with people. When you talk to members of the community, they usually cite the world as the defining characteristic of Skyrim. But again, what makes the world feel special? Plenty of other games had beautiful, interesting worlds to explore and engaging things to do. So what makes Skyrim any different? I really think that it's the simple fact that for millions of players, this was the first time we ever saw an interactive and reactive open world. Period. We had never seen anything like this. I'm going to get into how I think this phenomenon played out, but really so much of this is based on my own experiences, so I'd be very curious to hear what other people think in the comments. For me at least, a core element of the appeal of Skyrim when it came out, even before I had actually played the game, was the stealth mechanics, which is crazy. I remember watching these videos of this stealth archer guy on YouTube back in 2011. The guy would shoot an arrow and then roll around and go invisible and then show up on the other side of the room and shoot another arrow. And at the time, it honestly looked so cool. I associate this feeling with the 2005 movie Sky High, where a teenager goes to a superhero school to get high or something.
Hey, you want to dance?
No.
Me neither.
These experiences really scratch that itch, that urge to indulge in a power fantasy. And as a young kid, that feeling is extremely valuable and sought after. So when I started playing Skyrim a few months later, I immediately dove into those mechanics. I found that you could sneak around undetected and get better and better at doing so until you were completely in control of how enemies engaged with you. What a powerful idea to a child, that you could totally control the game's main antagonists. This was like a fantasy within a fantasy. But stealth really isn't just the power to hide from enemies and sneak attack them with ridiculously overpowered moves. Next thing you know, you're breaking into palaces and listening to Jarls talk about their war plans, or even breaking into the corner store to see what goes on there after hours. If you level pickpocketing enough, you can take off main characters' clothes and they just keep going about their business, giving you quests and chatting with you like nothing's even wrong. You can steal weapons from the enemies before engaging with them, and they'll be forced to fight you unarmed. You get to listen in on conversations without characters knowing you're there. And yeah, they're not exactly saying much, but in a first run, nobody knows that. In fact, because of the sheer scope of Skyrim, you can discover tiny little meaningless nuggets about the world for hours and hours and hours before you even notice the repetitiveness of it all. It's just that those little nuggets maybe didn't amount to as much as you initially expected. This is why the stealth skills always seem to me like the most fun, because they basically let you screw around with everyone else in the world. It's like if there was a skill for putting buckets on top of NPCs' heads, that skill would be in stealth right next to speech. I think this is the line where we go from breaking the unspoken templates of what mainstream game design at the time was able to allow, to now breaking even moral codes. You can steal from shopkeepers after breaking into their houses. You can pickpocket them, taking the clothes off their back and swapping in any items you want. You can poison them, and yeah, you can basically assassinate anyone you want like an unstoppable angel of death. But again, as a child, you usually have such rigid rules enforced on you about what you can and can't do. That makes a fantasy of doing and being whatever you want all the better, especially when it seems to transgress social or physical limitations. Many violent video games on some level convey a fantasy of transgression. For me, it was Assassin's Creed that first made me feel like I could break any rule, climbing on rooftops, sneaking around, and finding clever ways to take out targets. But it was Skyrim that really took off the training wheels. Assassin's Creed's core gameplay was sneaking around. That was the point of the game. Skyrim, on the other hand, presented a world where the point seemed to be up to you, and the world seemed so independent of you. So by breaking the rules, you felt all the more freed even from the idea that you were playing within a game. So how did they pull off this effect? Part of it comes down to the audience, right? From being a kid used to following rules and suddenly playing a game where I can walk around naked and snipe an evil caretaker from across the hall with no consequences. But the developers still could have fumbled the way that breaking rules actually feels like breaking rules. In other words, if no one responded to you breaking the rules, it wouldn't actually feel like you're doing anything. You know how in basically every game, you can run around in a circle in front of an NPC or just like jump up and down in front of them and they won't even know that you're doing it? They just have no clue. That feels bad. That's an immersion breaking moment where the fact that the NPC isn't real comes to the forefront. Well, even though you can jump around in front of people in Skyrim, NPCs won't react to every single thing you do. They do react just enough to enough things that you do feel like you're breaking the rules. It's this reactivity that creates the feeling of transgression. If you go into someone's house in, let's say, Pokemon Leaf Green, nobody's surprised to see you there. But if you break into someone's house in Skyrim in the middle of the night, they're gonna look you dead in the eyes and tell you to get out. That pushback creates the feeling of freedom. Every time you decide to commit a crime, you have a little rush knowing that the dice roll might fail. And if it succeeds, that risk feels like a rewarding moment, especially on a first playthrough. It's not enough that you can do whatever you want. You have to feel like breaking the rules actually breaks a rule. The same thing happens when you fail to pickpocket someone or get caught picking a lock or get caught stealing or killing. You get a bounty, you get yelled at, and in many cases, you get the whole village charging in to try to kill you. It's a silly thing, but I think the meme of killing the chicken in Riverwood and then getting your ass clapped by Sven and Feindal is precisely what made so many casual players of Skyrim feel like this game was living up to the go anywhere, do anything fantasy. Even the idea that you can just escape your bounty, but you'll have to avoid the guards of that hold indefinitely, that stuff is real gold when you don't know the ins and outs of how the systems work. The illusion of freedom shines brightest when you feel the characters of this world trying to stop you from disobeying their laws. Because most people cite world exploration as the best experience Skyrim has to offer, I want to see how it fits into this transgression paradigm. Freedom is also the motivation for exploration. And once again, we see a similar theme of transgression. The world is extremely hostile to you. If you see a living being on the road, there's a high chance they're going to try to kill you. This antagonism, again, helps exploration feel freeing. Entering places you're not allowed to be makes you feel all the more liberated. Radiant encounters, for example, even with all their limitations, contribute to this. Feeling like you're being hunted by assassins or bounty hunters because of your actions plays into that experience. To that end, I think it's not lore or gameplay that makes Skyrim's world feel real. It's the interactivity and the reactivity. What you do and what the NPCs do in response. Feeling like you're breaking the rules and feeling the game responding to your shenanigans. So, experiencing this fantasy doesn't last forever. How could it? Once the mechanics are fully explored, you realize that they're only an inch deep and the illusion starts to break down. You start to game the system. And when you do, the abstract understanding of the rules kind of removes you from the visceral, emotional experience of the game's ways of expressing player freedom. When this happens, the rest of the mechanics, like the combat or the magic system or the mediocre story, just probably aren't going to be enough to keep most players going. For the average player, you probably stop playing around this point and feel like you had a great time. Only about 31% of players of the original Skyrim Steam release have the achievement to finish the main quest, and on Special Edition, that's only 12%. In a game this old, where the main quest really isn't that long, it's kind of hard to say whether this is a lot or a little. Many people play a long time and never even finish the main quest, but I think my interpretation is that some point around hour 10 or 20, the initial fantasy fades and the game's content and mechanics aren't enough to keep most players around. That said, I know tons of players have hundreds of hours in this game, including me, so clearly there's more to this phenomenon past just the fantasy. Maybe we're all trying to recreate this nostalgic moment, or maybe we really are getting something out of all these hours past the fantasy fading points. Even when you eventually stop playing, that first impression remains and solidifies over time as nostalgia. The difference is that now, each time I came back to this game, it's clear that that initial experience has faded for me. Once I've learned all the tricks the game plays, All that's left to play with is mechanics or lore. It's unsurprising, I think, that these are the main topics of Skyrim YouTube after all these years. But I think actually two things happened at once to make my nostalgic experiences impossible to recapture. The first is obvious. The novelty wore off, and I knew only too well how the game would react to my actions. This is why when Skyrim Special Edition came out in 2016, and I went back through this experience all over again, I found myself so much less attached to this game that had meant so much to me a few years before. The older I got, the more games I found that scratched this itch, eventually falling into grand strategy and management genres as the ultimate epitome of freedom. But eventually, I realized that even the enjoyment I once had wasn't even inside me anymore. It couldn't be found, even if the novelty of the game could have been brought back somehow. Breaking the rules is only possible when the rules still matter to you. So now I think that it's partly the fact that the novelty of this experience is gone, but actually more so the fact that the belief system surrounding childhood, when rules and limitations define everything about your life, compared to now where all those training wheels are also gone. So motivation comes more from seeking out rewarding experiences rather than breaking rules and pushing boundaries and experimenting. Whether it's the unspoken rules of how video games used to operate, or the rules that limited me in childhood, their eventual absence meant that transgressing those rules was just no longer satisfying. It's not fun to break into a character's house and sneak around when you know that you can kind of do whatever you want in real life. As a child, freedom is all about testing the limits of your agency, whether physical or social. As an adult, freedom becomes about deciding how you want to use your agency, deciding what you want to spend your time and energy moving toward. Nowadays, I would almost want to try to avoid breaking the rules when possible to create more limitations on the game and make it feel more real, make the stakes higher, and avoid that feeling of emptiness that comes with being the only real person in a world full of NPCs. It's the difference between playing a game more as myself versus trying to really play as a character in the world. And yeah, some characters might be thieves, but again, you're putting that limitation on yourself. You're not just playing around, discovering what will go wrong when you break the rules, as I was doing when I was a kid. At some point in my life, this shift happened without me knowing it, where play for its own sake, experimentation, and rule breaking lost their excitement for me. Nowadays, I see these things just as risks that may or may not be worth taking depending on what outcome I'm trying to achieve. The fundamental shift from experimentation to outcome-driven motivation honestly ruined a lot of games for me. A really similar experience to this happened to me with Pokemon as well. Playing Pokemon as a child is strangely very similar to Skyrim. It rewards those urges of feeling like you're free on your own, exploring a real world and making your own decisions. All of this is a core part of Pokemon's appeal to young audiences, or at least that's what it felt like in the early 2000s. I haven't played a Pokemon game in like 10 years. When I try to play those games from my childhood today, as a way of soaking in some nostalgia for an hour or two every couple of years, I'm trying to think of strategies, or I'm trying to put limitations or extra goals on myself, like playing a Nuzlocke or trying to actually fill the Pokedex for once. But of course I never do, because what's the point? Completion can of course be a huge source of motivation for games, but that's never been a core element for me. If I had to summarize what I'm interested in, it's achievement or creation, that kind of thing. That's why I'm so drawn to strategy and management games. So, over the last few years, I've been trying to figure out why Skyrim has remained the defining nostalgic video game experience of my early life. The unconscious solution was, of course, to watch Skyrim video essays. It's no exaggeration to say that this was the basis of why I made my channel. I was watching the expansive Elder Scrolls video essays made by Private Sessions and Patrician TV back in 2020, and eventually had the thought that I should make my own video on a game that I thought I actually knew something about. That thought became my Europa Universalis 4 retrospective. I think that the role that these essays have ultimately played for me is that they've created a layer in between me and the game. A layer where analysis and critique can be the primary experience, and yet the topic can still revisit nostalgic moments from my childhood. It's almost a way of bringing Skyrim with me into adulthood, that undiscovered country from which no traveler returns. I'm not trying to be a downer. This honestly doesn't make me feel sad. Instead, I feel like I finally understand why my approach to games has changed, why my approach to playing them has morphed more and more into feeling like fun side projects with goals to achieve rather than worlds to explore for their own sake. It's why, even though Skyrim is probably the most memorable first experience with a game that I've ever had, it's nowhere close to my most played game. It's also why the genre of open world RPGs just doesn't seem to pull me in the way it used to, no matter how many times I try to finally finish The Witcher 3 or finally start a Morrowind campaign. In many ways, I will never play Skyrim again, because the Skyrim I really loved lives only in my memories. If you enjoyed this video, consider sending it to a friend or giving it a like. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the comments.